Today, let's dive into the second of our four Limerence archetypes, the intriguing phenomenon of choosing someone unavailable. Now, you might wonder why someone would choose an unavailable person to fall in love with. The truth is, on some level, if you have been Limerence before, and I assume you have been or are because you're watching this video, you actually knew what you were doing. It's a fascinating mix of unconscious desires and conscious choices that makes us choose the unavailable people to actually fall for. This is where the thing called what I call the safety illusion comes into play. Okay, and I'll talk more about that later. Since often choosing someone unavailable isn't really about being reckless or impulsive or misguided or naive. Okay, it's about a perceived safety net, an illusion of security that prevents deeper vulnerability. So remember that these choices that we make, they are not mistakes, okay, but they are reflections of complex emotional landscapes. So as we explore this more, consider how these patterns may have shown up in your life that has actually contributed to you being limerent, okay, or having limerent episodes in your life. So, like I said, when we choose someone unavailable, the choice isn't often rooted in impulsivity or naivety. Instead, there's a deeper, perhaps subconscious choice at play. And like I said earlier, choosing someone who is unavailable can feel like the safer option. So the illusion of safety comes from the distance that we actually have with this person. The distance could come in all forms. It could be an emotionally unavailable person. It could be a physically unavailable person. Okay, they are just not right there with you. It could be a celebrity, which is both physical and emotional. So this illusion of safety, it actually acts as a protective barrier that prevents us from being fully vulnerable with ourselves and with the other person. Okay, it prevents us from being fully vulnerable in love. And if you recognize this pattern, it's really, the first step in actually understanding why, as limerent people, we make these choices for ourselves and how do they actually serve us and our needs in love. So when we talk about distance here, okay, it isn't merely like a coincidence or, just a pattern. Usually when we choose emotionally unavailable people, it's a result of our own wiring and the comfort of familiarity that we actually feel, that this feelings with this distant person actually brings out in us. So I kind of just want to talk a little bit more about the sense of safety and familiarity and how that can actually lead us to choosing relationships that maintain a certain distance. Okay, this is actually not a permanent state. Okay, our patterns or the way in which we actually select partners can totally be changed and can be totally healed. Okay, so previously I was a anxious avoidant sort of person, but now I would say that I'm moving right into a more secure kind of relationship style. So our brains are adaptable, and with conscious effort, we can actually rewire these tendencies, okay, to seek healthier, more fulfilling connections and more fulfilling love with another person. Okay, so I would like you to actually consider, okay, your own patterns. Okay, how do you actually fall for people, and have they always been available for you? Because recognizing these patterns and who you're actually drawn to is the first step in changing those patterns. By understanding that the distance is not accidental but it's actually learned and sort of wired within us, we can actually begin the process of undoing it. Okay, so self-awareness is actually really, really powerful, and once we recognize these patterns, we can actually choose to break them and seek connections that provide genuine closeness and fulfillment. And it also gets us nearer to the love that we have been looking for. So right now, I'll just like to kind of give an example of a client's story. And James, who is not his real name, he was a client, okay, for quite some time. And he actually wrote to me, and we started our sessions after he read my book on Limerence. Okay, so a little bit of an advertisement. Okay, the link to the book is in the description box down below. So James was actually struggling with availability, the concept of availability and love. So the gist of his first letter was, about him saying that I've been in love with a woman who lives in another country for 3 years. We see each other maybe twice a year. Okay, this lady has made it very clear upfront to James that she's not looking for anything serious. Okay, she's been clear about that from the beginning. And yet, James says, I can't stop. When I try to date someone who's actually available, someone who lives in my city and wants what I want, I feel nothing. I don't feel excited. Okay, I feel a sense of dread, almost like I'm going through the motions. The long distance one feels real in contrast. The available ones actually feel flat. So what is actually happening? So for James, he already kind of knew or had some self-awareness around like his feelings around availability and the types of people that he felt for. So that's already like he's gone beyond the first step of self-awareness. So what I actually was explaining to James when we were talking about this was that what he was actually describing, okay, because his letter was actually quite long, and he talked a lot about chemistry and sparks and things like that. But what I really wanted to make clear to James and to you watching the video and to anyone else out there who is actually linking, excitement and chemistry with love, what I want to say is that emotional unavailability or unavailability in a person isn't mystery and it isn't chemistry. Okay, it's not that the unavailable person is more magnetic, more remarkable, or is like the right one for you. Okay, it's really the distance itself that is actually what you are, pining after. The distance is the whole point. When someone is geographically impossible, okay, they are unavailable, they are not looking for commitment, they are an avoidant type, they are already married or they have a partner, the thread of real intimacy disappears. This is something that you have to let it sink in. Okay, so you get the feeling of love when you actually fall for these people, and this is done at a very unconscious and conscious level. Okay, so you fall for them and you get this like, get this all these excited feelings of like love and the longing, the electricity, the sense of being oriented towards someone and having someone in your life, without actually having to have the real thing that really frightens you the most, which is being fully known and vulnerable to and accepted by someone who could then reject you and leave at some point. Okay? The available people feel flat, not because they are, less than. It's not that because, they are bad people. They feel unexciting and they feel like, like you're just going through the motions when you date them because they require something that possibly you yourself and even James has been very carefully protecting yourself and was protecting himself from. And that is actual connection and closeness. Okay? Think about it. Distance is what it is, right? There's a gap between you and this person. However that gap looks like, whether it's physical or emotional, doesn't really matter, there is a gap. But you know that there's a gap and you cannot be with this person, but yet you are still allowing yourself to fall in love with them. And not only fall in love with them, you find this gap really exciting. You want to overcome this gap. You find it very, very thrilling. You find it, like what he said, it's very magnetic. It's full of sparks, and all these emotions within you, and the stories that you tell yourself about this spark and the distance and things like that. It usually creates a story within your mind that then fuels your mental fantasies into thinking that what you actually have is real. But what you are actually trying to run away from, or what you're actually uncomfortable with, is actual closeness in a relationship with another person. Because think about it, when you're in a relationship, you are prone to rejection, You might quarrel with the person. There might be some habits and things that they don't like about you, and you don't like about them as well, vice versa. There, may come a point in time where you're actually with someone and you decide that, one of you actually decides that you do not want to go on with the relationship. And along the way, to build a very healthy relationship, you do have to be vulnerable with each other. And sometimes, a lot of times actually, for limerent people, that can be super, 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 super uncomfortable. And it's something that you really, really want to avoid. You want to avoid the rejection. You will have a fear of someone leaving you, perhaps a fear of abandonment. And which is why instead of going through the real motions with someone in a real relationship, you choose someone who is at a distance, because when someone is at a distance, they can't possibly, come up to you and say like, oh, I don't like you, or I want to leave you. They will never leave you in a sense, because they were never yours in the first place. So this is something to kind of sit on and to digest as well as we go through this video and as you reflect on your own experiences. So what I really kind of want to drill into, and the real question that you should be asking yourself when you select emotionally unavailable people, or unavailable people, so to speak. So often when we are frustrated with a relationship, we kind of, ask ourselves, why won't they commit? Okay, but today we are actually flipping that question on its head a little bit to something much more empowering for a limerent individual. Am I seeking commitment from the right person? Someone who actually can give me commitment as well, can reciprocate my commitment. This shift is crucial because it moves the focus from what we can't control, okay, which is the other person's actions, to what we can control, which is our own choices and our expectations. So think about the relationships that you have pursued in the past, or perhaps you are pursuing now. Are you drawn to people who are not available for you? And sometimes, they make it very clear that they're not available. They actually tell you that they do not like you, okay? Or they tell you that they actually have someone. Or they tell you that they can't be with you for some reason because maybe they are commitment phobic, they are avoidant, whatever it is. If so, perhaps the real question to actually ask yourselves about them isn't really about their commitment, because a lot of times you are like, I'm such an amazing person, and why wouldn't this other person actually commit to me? Why wouldn't they want to be with me? But instead, the question you should be asking is whether this person that you're actually pining after is truly capable of the commitment that you are looking for in a relationship. Can they really reciprocate your feelings and reciprocate and be in a relationship with you? Okay, this is not about blaming yourself, okay, about like criticizing your own choices, okay? It's about understanding yourself a little bit better. It's about ensuring that we are investing our emotional energy wisely with the correct people who can reciprocate our feelings and our desires. Because if your end goal is to get into a healthy, happy relationship, you can't possibly do that with someone that you have a distance with. So let me just talk a little bit about different, hacks and different ways that in which you can actually think about your situation, and which will hopefully help you put you on the healing journey towards healthier relationships. So let me start by something, and I mean this very sincerely, okay? This pattern that you actually have is not about weakness, okay? It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, okay? It's actually some sort of intelligence that your mind has actually worked out. So choosing unavailable people, okay, is actually a sign that your nervous system has actually found a way to experience the warmth and the aliveness of loving someone without really exposing you to the specific fears and terrors of being truly known and truly vulnerable with someone and then getting abandoned or rejected by that person. Okay, so your nervous system in your mind actually has built a structure that lets you want someone without having to fully risk yourself by being in a real relationship. So that's a really remarkable piece of cognitive engineering, okay? But it came at a cost, okay? It came at a cost in that you are now falling for people who cannot be with you and cannot reciprocate your love. So from the neuroscience actually point of view, when we experience early relationships where closeness was then followed by pain, in the early years of your life, where you were being like, you were seen and you were present and you were visible, to whoever it was that was looking after you. But then after that, it was quickly followed by being hurt. Okay, maybe you express yourself, but then your vulnerability was met with rejection, abandonment, or inconsistency. So your nervous system then learns that pattern. Okay, and it builds what researchers call a defensive attachment strategy. And in attachment science, these maps onto what is sometimes called dismissive or fearful-avoidant patterns. You probably have heard of this at some point. Not because the person doesn't want connection, but ironically, they often want it very intensely. But because the internal model of a close relationship includes an expected cost after that relationship is built, they then learn that if you get close enough to someone, something bad will happen after that. So the system finds a workaround. Okay, it creates a container for love that keeps the threat at a very manageable distance, that doesn't have you emotionally investing in someone and then getting abandoned in some way. In the psychology or neuro-linguistic terms, what's happening is a conflict between two deeply held values that you may have: the desire for love versus the desire and the need for safety. So the unconscious mind is running both programs of both needs simultaneously. And the Limerence pattern, which is falling for the unavailable person, is the solution that your mind or your psychological system, your psyche, has actually found. And it satisfies both programs at once. So yes, you have found love in a sense, and you have no risk of full exposure to this person. Hence, you fulfill your need for safety because you will not get rejected or abandoned in some way. So in this case, when you are going through this is how you keep the Limerence cycle or the obsessive pattern in a loop. The obsession persists. As I've written about before and as I've talked about before in other videos, the obsession persists because your certainty, if you have a certain certainty about your situation, and most of the time when you're at a distance, there's always this slight hope that you have that the person may actually, one day reciprocate your affection. Okay, resolution, okay, in either direction actually closes the Limerence loop. So the not knowing or the uncertainty keeps the fantasy that you have, the mental fantasies, which is really, Limerence, it keeps the fantasies intact. And the fantasy that you have with this person who is at a distance from you, in a very real way, it actually feels safer than the reality that you are living in. Okay, and just to give you a very quick example, I used to experience this myself. So I used to be a very warm, very open person. Okay, when I was very young, I still am, by the way. But when I was very young and very open to many friends, I had certain friends that I was very so-called loyal to. Okay, and this loyalty, unfortunately, was always met with the person sort of, from what my younger self actually saw, abandoning me for other friends or abandoning me for other things in life, and kind of like completely forgetting the friendship that we had. And I also had crushes back then where there was this pattern of like, things would go very well and then suddenly something happens and the person just disappears. And it kind of reflected my youth as well, because I have been quite open about this, but I have not come from a very emotionally stable family. Okay, my parents were always fighting, and from there you learn this pattern where like things can be calm for a while and then suddenly something explodes. So your happiness doesn't last for a long time. So when you get to that point where you think your happiness will not last for a long time, why invest your feelings and why invest in anything in the first place? Okay, just love from a distance, just like from a distance, because then you won't be vulnerable and you won't feel any pain. Okay, so that's my little story. So today I want to build on the architecture that I've been talking about in my newsletters and in my previous video as well, which is the system that you've created that allows you to love from a distance, but also makes you, keep yourself in that Limerence loop. So you can imagine this, okay? A structure where there is you on one side, and then there is them on the other side. And you're separated by a safe distance. Like I said, the distance can be anything, okay? It can be emotional, it can be physical. So this isn't an accidental setup. In fact, it is actually quite intentional. Okay, it's designed to make the longing for connection feel secure without the vulnerability that closeness might actually bring. So it's important to understand that this limerent architecture, okay, that you might actually be having within you isn't a flaw or a failure. Instead, it's a clever mechanism that has evolved to protect you. So it allows you to experience the desire for connection while maintaining a level of safety. And this is the key point. The unavailability of the other person isn't really just a coincidence. Okay, it's a safety net that your system has built. And this insight can be really, really liberating because it acknowledges that there's a conscious reason behind your pattern. And in terms of BaZi, or in terms of the 5 elements, okay, which is a sort of energetic read of your birth chart and how you actually love someone, certain chart configurations can carry what is called a very strong officer or resource energy. And what this means is that it can create people who are extraordinarily self-contained, deeply private, and who experience vulnerability as structurally uncomfortable for them, okay, rather than merely emotionally difficult. So understanding this about yourself isn't an excuse to actually keep staying in the pattern and keep being limerent for people forever. Okay, but it does help to explain why just being more open, being more warm to people, have connections, just build connections and you'll be okay. That kind of advice probably won't work for you. If you're someone who is very, very self-contained, very highly independent, very private, and it takes very long for you to actually let someone in. When that actually happens, limerence or liking someone from a distance can actually be very, very appealing. So if James's letter actually felt like, it resonated with you, if the available people constantly feel unexciting, they feel flat, and the impossible, ones at a distance feel alive, I want to actually name this pattern, and this is what I call the safety illusion. Okay, talked about this in the introduction, but the safety illusion is not because the feelings are not real. Okay, they are. The longing, the electricity, the sense of deep rightness, all of that is real. But the structure that is actually built inside is an illusion of intimacy. It's not a real thing. You get the feeling of being in love without the thing that love actually requires, which is the sustained risk of being seen fully by someone, being vulnerable fully with someone who could genuinely actually reach you and reciprocate, your feelings, but then, they could actually reject you. So the safety illusion isn't a character flaw, it's a protection that actually has outlived its usefulness. And the question it's waiting for you to actually ask isn't, like what I said earlier, why won't they commit? But are you actually asking the right person to actually commit to you? Is that person actually even capable of commitment in the first place? So the framework that I actually use with a lot of my limerence clients is what I often call the Invisible Doctrine. Okay, it's a pattern breaker that I actually developed. And as you know, a doctrine is a set of rules and beliefs that operate below conscious awareness. The assumptions that your system makes about how the world works, what relationships cost, what you're allowed to want, and what's dangerous to want. And every safety illusion runs on an invisible doctrine. And the doctrines tend to sound something like this. So step 1, if someone really, really knew me, they would leave. Love always comes with conditions I won't be able to meet. It's safer to want someone from a distance than to risk getting too close or loving someone from up close. And if I stay in control of how close someone can get, I can't be blindsided. And that is why you like someone at a distance. So none of these are things that James would say out loud. None of these are things that I would have said out loud if I were back in my emotionally unavailable phase. They are not conscious beliefs. Okay, they are operating instructions. They are written very early on in life in conditions that, him and me and probably you as well no longer live in, but it's now governing the choices that we are making. And the Invisible Doctrine work has actually 3 stages to it. So the first thing is about surfacing it. What is the belief underneath the pattern? Not your rationalization, okay? The actual belief. So this usually requires sitting with some discomfort because the doctrine often sounds, when you hear it clearly, it actually sounds quite sad. Okay, and I want you to sit with that. The second is to date it. Okay, when was the timeline? When do you actually learn this belief or this doctrine? What were the conditions in which this became true? Doctrines form in specific contexts. Okay, we have specific beliefs that came from specific situations in life. When you can locate the context, you can start to see that the doctrine made sense then and evaluate whether it still holds true now. Third stage, test it. Not with a grand gesture of vulnerability to someone random, but actually test it with something small. So 1 degree more openness than usual. Okay, not tearing down the walls or breaking down the walls and getting yourself out there in a big way. Just living the gap. Okay, be vulnerable with someone. Maybe just ask someone out. Ask a friend out. Say like, hey, there's this event going on. Will you go with me? Something small. Okay, maybe chatting to your barista. Something small and vulnerable. It's about building the vulnerability muscle. So the full doctrine mapping process is what I guide people through in the membership and also in my entire ecosystem of work. But even just asking yourself now, what is the rule I'm actually running on that actually puts me in this constant limerence loop is a huge first step, is a huge first beginning for you. So I want you to do that, after you watch this video. So the essence of this, whatever I'm actually saying, is our shifting perspective on the distance in relationships. Okay, like I said, distance can be a barrier in some way, but it's also a safeguard from our vulnerabilities that we aren't actually ready to face. Having a distance or falling in love with someone at a distance is about fulfilling a role that we were hesitant to actually undertake ourselves, which is to be more vulnerable. But now, as we are older now, we grow and we seek deeper connections. The task becomes about building a tolerance for the closeness that we desire. It means gradually expanding our comfort zones to welcome intimacy and connection rather than keeping them at bay and keeping them away from us. Okay, remember that this journey, towards closeness, towards real connections, is about embracing the change at a pace that feels right for you. It's about recognizing that the protection the distance provided was necessary at one point of time in your life. But right now, it's time to invite more closeness into your lives. And, persisting by constantly liking people at a distance is not going to bring more intimacy and love into your life. So if your archetype is actually a safety illusion archetype and you really resonated with what I was saying today, you recognize something about yourself in James's letter and in today's topic, the most important thing I want you to hear is this. Okay, you don't have to, start to be vulnerable, dismantle your entire structure all at once. The work that we do on ourselves isn't about becoming someone who throws themselves open suddenly and risks everything, in their lives. It's actually about incrementally and at your own pace, building tolerance or the closeness you actually want. So that is the work inside the membership and inside my whole ecosystem of work. Mapping your intimacy blueprints, where the distance became the strategy, identifying your specific patterns, and building slowly the capacity for real closeness in a way that doesn't ask you to override your nervous system or override who you are. If you want to confirm your archetype, or explore whether you have a secondary one layered underneath, and someone else actually do, the diagnostics in the description box. Do take your time with it. I have links to my membership as well, which I'm consistently building right now. It's a huge ecosystem that, works on different parts of Limerence. So emotional unavailability, how do you find love, how do you date better, how do you build your self-esteem, things that actually Limerence people like us actually go through and what I actually went through before, and I want to share that with you because I want you to get better. And right now, my book is also linked down below, and as well as any, all my social media links, and you can get in touch with me. Right now, when this video actually ends, I want you to ask yourself, what's one belief about relationships you've been running quietly, in your mind for years? What is the doctrine that you actually formed? How do you actually form it? And what do you actually want to, fulfill, from this doctrine, instead of, just going through life just on this belief? You don't have to name it to anyone, but I'd love to hear and know if something has surfaced. So I hope this video has helped you in some way. And this is Sonia signing off. I'll be back again with more videos on limerence and everything else in my ecosystem that could help you, heal yourself and to better design a better life for yourself. Thank you.